Hi, my name is Fabio Petito. I teach international relations at the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. I'm Italian. Well, perhaps we should go back at the origin of this idea of dialogue of civilizations in international relations. I think to understand its origin, we need to go back at the time of the end of the Cold War, when there was this search for a new world order. And I think there were competing ideas, and definitely two very powerful and popular competing ideas were the well-known thesis of Samuel Huntington, which he wrote his article in 1993 on the clash of civilizations, but also the other competing vision of world order was put forward by Francis Fukuyama, with this idea of the end of history, and essentially the idea that we were entering an era when there will be only one game in town, the globalization of liberalism. Now, at that point in time, I think there were a number of scholars, also statesmen and public intellectuals, which felt that these two visions, discourse, were limiting the options. And there came this alternative, which was the idea of dialogue of civilizations, which of course was first of all to oppose the danger and the possibility of the clash of civilizations. So it was framed against this idea of the clash, but also it was framed, and this must be understood, as an alternative to the idea of the homogenization of international affairs along the lines of the end of the history argument. So the idea was that we need to actually find a new world order which will be the product of the recognition of the plurality of world cultural and civilization tradition, which need to be brought into a dialogue as a way of producing a new synthesis, which will be almost, I would say, the normative base for a new, more just and peaceful world order. I think this was the idea articulated particularly powerfully by the then president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Mohammad Khatami, which was one of the spokespersons of this idea, but also other statements very different, like Václav Havel articulated a very similar understanding of the need for this dialogue among civilizations. Now, clearly, this idea became even very important after 9/11, when there was really the feeling that we were entering a very dangerous era of clash, in particular between the Western and the Islamic world. That was the context of the war on terror, and it was in that historical juncture that a number of initiatives were taken by the United Nations, but a number of international organizations, even the World Public Forum of Dialogue of Civilization, was created just after these major events. And therefore, the idea of dialogue of civilization became more institutionalized and in a number of initiatives by civil society, states. One important one then was the United Nations initiative on the Alliance of Civilizations, which was a joint partnership created by the Spanish and Turkish government during the war on terror as a way of opposing this discourse. So my point is that after 9/11, this discourse of dialogue of civilization became very much an antithesis to the Islamic West oppositions. Many people feeling that there was the need for opposing growing prejudice, a lack of understanding, growing mutual mistrust among these communities, felt that this idea of dialogue of civilization had the power, to point to the right direction. And now, here we don't have time to go into the details, let's say, of how this unfolded, and I think there is quite a bit of critical things to be said about how this initiative ended up in the United Nations system becoming a little bit too bureaucratic and losing some of its powerful, I think, initial origin. However, I think now we live in a second decade of the 21st century, and I think in particular we live in an era which has been massively shaped by the global economic and financial crisis, which has affected the international system in the last 6-7 years. Now, an era, I think this crisis, what has shown beyond the problems of the capitalist and neoliberal system of economic governance is actually that we are entering a new era, an era where I would say the centrality of the Western world is becoming less important in a world which is becoming definitely more multipolar. I mean, in fact, it's not a coincidence that after this crisis there is much more reference in mainstream media, for example, to the discourse of the emerging power, the BRICS, the new global economic shift to the East. So I think the international system is going through this epoch-making shifts, which signs, the entrance into a new century. And I think in that context, the dialogue of civilizations acquires a new peculiar meaning. And that's provides the framework to build a new world order which recognizes the plurality of poles, great powers, economic spheres in the world, but also adds to that the need to think also that these new emerging powers are also embedded in very ancient and rich worldwide civilizations and cultural traditions. And therefore, that this is not only about bringing to the table of the new international coexistence new economic and material power, but also new ideas. And therefore, the new order that I think will emerge in the 21st century will be also an order which will need to accommodate the worldviews of different civilizations. And that's why I think this idea of dialogue of civilization in this post-financial crisis in the second decades of the 21st century acquires a new meaning, a meaning of constructing a new world order, which will be not anymore Eurocentric, Western-centric, but hopefully will be more just and peaceful if we are able to build this dialogue among different worldwide civilizational and cultural traditions.